Before we get started, make sure you subscribe to this channel. That way, when I release more videos like this, you'll get notified. Rory and I had so much fun in our previous conversation. We had to do a take two. We had to continue on, and we got into an amazing conversation around fear and how to overcome the plethora of fear that is going on in the workplace. So, over to you. I'll let you kind of jump in and frame up what we were just talking about for those who are listening in.
Yeah. So I was, one of the things I was sharing around fear, like it's a huge issue that we all deal with nowadays. We really struggle and we've really hesitated to create space for us as professionals to fail, as humans to fail, right? And so when we find ourselves in these opportunities or wanting to move towards an opportunity, so much fear comes up for us. And so in a coaching session I was having the other day, we were talking about, this person taking a really massive step. And one of the questions I shared with him or I asked is, can you be willing to allow yourself to find comfort in fear?
Wow.
And it was one of those questions where when it hits because it goes silent and they sit back. And sometimes like these questions, they come up and I don't know where it came from, but it was like the right question at the right time. And it really helped this individual reflect that they were like, wow, like that is exactly what I needed. Because oftentimes, like we perceive fear as being bad. What if fear isn't bad? What if mistakes aren't bad? What if mistakes are neutral? They're not good or bad, but they're part of the learning process that helps get us to the other side, right? So we have to make mistakes. That's the fastest way to learn. It's the fastest way to grow. So why fear them?
What do you think we're mostly afraid of? Is it making mistakes and how we're going to look, or what do you think people are afraid of?
Yes, that is a great question. I'm so glad you asked that, because part of our fear with making mistakes is, and I don't know if I shared this earlier, but, we often play from this position of defense, right? So we're in this mode trying to protect ourselves. We feel like there's so much coming at us that we got to keep our walls up. We got to be strong. We got to play defense. And by doing that, one of the things that we're most often trying to protect is others' perception of us. So we spend a lot of time trying to cultivate a narrative that we actually don't even have control of anyway. But what it does is it keeps us from actually taking steps forward. And so it doesn't help us. And now this is a completely different thing than creating a narrative or your branding message that you actually want to, this is your Batman calling signal in the world. We're doing it from a place of lack and I would say lack and just fear, right? It's just more fear that if I take this step, if I make this mistake, people are going to judge me. They may not accept me anymore. I'm going to be lonely. I'm going to be isolated. Like all of these things come up for us. And, one of the things I always, share and I always coach through is only when we show up authentically, ready to face the fears, ready to make mistakes, is when others are actually going to accept us.
So we're afraid of rejection. So we isolate ourselves from connection. So either way, it seems like we're not in connection anyway. So you might as well like go for it and try something new and maybe get more authentic connection.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's interesting though, like when you talked about in the beginning of our last conversation is what was hard for you to move forward is there were things in your personal life. And you kind of like said, you didn't say what the biggest pride, like I got divorced when I was in my 30s, like it was a little bit of like, oh, it was hard time, like how do we take these kind of things of saying, all right, I got divorced. Like I could say I got divorced more than once. And it's like, how is that like like pride and, like, look at me. Look at how I failed relationally, or look at how many, like, how do you get that to a point of saying I'm embarrassed about something to, yeah, this is good. I'm cool with that. Or do you just go to acceptance?
I moved to, I acknowledge it. Like I've talked about it before in other places. I actually share it, on if you go into my about page, I think I talk about, within this 18-month period, like how it was failed marriage, the fear of being separated from my kid, like my family being separated, and me saying, oh man, this is like the worst thing that could ever happen. And also finding myself in a position where I was also, transitioning my career, my work at that time, moving out of engineering. So it was just like a lot of stuff happening. And it was like a huge impact to my whole identity. But I look back on those times, I look back on that, that relationship, and I learned so much. I came out of that relationship once I did that inner work to kind of process it. I came out of it much stronger, actually saying, you know what, I know what I want and I know what I don't want. I have my list of non-negotiables and I have my list of things that are going to be negotiable, right? And so I was able to like embrace those things, and I take that experience not only into my relationship now, my future relationship, but also my career, my business. Like those are skills, they're so applicable to every aspect of our lives if we have the awareness on how to use them.
So it's like your fear and what you're afraid of. So with your client, it's like whatever your client was afraid of actually is the catapult for whatever the future impact is. One of my favorite thought leaders that I just get fascinated by is Monica Lewinsky. Because
Yeah.
she's a big advocate for, obviously for cyberbullying, and nobody's experienced more cyberbullying than Monica Lewinsky. And I just love how funny she is about the whole thing. Like everything she does on Twitter is like a little bit of tongue in cheeks. And it kind of tells me like she's really processed this story. And what was her greatest source of shame is her greatest source of impact.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like without some of those difficulties, you would be the coach that you are now?
Absolutely not. And that's one of the things I highlight on my website. And I love this quote from Oprah. It was part of the 1997, her commencement address. I believe it was Wesley College. And one of her quotes was, turn your wounds into wisdom.
Mm.
And I just like that, every challenge that comes up that I go through, I'm like, there may be a challenge. There's been a challenge. How do I use that? It makes me say, how do I turn this into, a power, like make it part of my power, merge with the rest of my power, with the rest of my value, because it's so valuable.
So fear is connected to our story.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just a generic fear. So go using your client's example or any other example. It's not like I just generically feel fear and that I'm going to be isolated. It's how that fear might be connected to your own personal story and your own personal traumas that is where the superpower is. Like everybody has their own little shape of something or another, but it's how it's connecting there in that specific narrative, not this generic. So maybe that's why a coach is so beneficial. Is generic, just do this with fear isn't going to work enough. It's going to be, let's talk about your story and what you believe and how do we do battle against that belief.
Yes, I love that you brought that up, Betsy, because it's so important. Like the work that we're doing through coaching is really to separate this bold step that you may have fear around from a previous or past narrative that in your mind on the subconscious level, you've joined together. But we have to do the work to kind of separate those out and really decompose and say, this is actually a jewel for you to go through this, even if it turns out to be less than favorable. You're going to learn something from it. It's going to be part of your growth. But to make sure we keep it separate from these past narratives that we've set that may be part of our upbringing, our childhood, like the other side of the fear. If we've come from a place where we've at times felt lonely or isolated or alienated, we want to make sure that as we move forward in our life now, we're not continuing that narrative with this new opportunity or challenge that we're facing.
Which is why for me, a lot of times my approach with my brand building, and the website copy and the website process is I use them as action learning opportunities to actually to almost reprogram it. I don't know if I was consciously, when I was designing the process, I was thinking about it, but I think that in my mind, you can't just like sit there in therapy all the live long day. I think that's why therapy alone, just talk therapy, is not going to 100% heal you, because you have to try out new things. You have to kind of lay out new pathways. So when I talk to my clients around like, hey, you should really like use your own name in your branding, and they start having a meltdown. And it's like, well, why not? Let's talk about that one. And all these fears come out, and then they actually buy the URL with their name. It's like, okay, now you've updated that storyline. Or can you put your picture on your homepage? I love the fact that your picture is all over your website. And those were conversations we had back in the day
Yes.
that was
Mhm.
not where you're at now. So, that's up there. So now you have that other element. And when my clients tell me like, oh my gosh, we've had this transformation, I'm like, well, I didn't help you. We just created exercises for
Yeah.
you to have a new ending to your old narrative. And I think
Yeah.
that's what's really powerful around having a container of growth that's not just your own thing.
Yes. Totally agree. And I like to say, like, although I do, like, I focus on 3 levels of healing, I'm not a healer. I'm just a facilitator and a guide.
Yeah.
That happens to one of the things that actually, like, one of the things, key lessons that I learned from you, Betsy, is it's about how we position our consulting to not be about our medium by which we deliver the transformation, right? So
Mhm.
if I'm a process guy, that's just the medium. If I'm a Six Sigma guy, that's just the medium by which I deliver the work. But we are so much more than just that medium, right? And that title.
It's so interesting because it took me a long time to really think that I had my program name wrong. I was calling it brand messaging and positioning, where it's like it's really brand positioning. It took me, it's so funny. It's like even though I do all this stuff for all these other people, it took me a while to realize the positioning is the key. And the positioning is where the power is. Like you were talking about how you help your clients take back their power.
Yes.
And when you own your positioning, that is your power. When you
Mhm.
are owning, like, no, this is the value that I create, this is the impact I want to have, and I'm going to go out there without apologies. It's the positioning first, and then the messaging will come, then the medium will come, then the methodology, everything else will come later. Once I understand, like, this is what I'm going to try to do. And I think one of the things we were talking about before we decided to record our second session is one of the big things that overcomes fear in my experience is when your what and when your who and your why gets bigger,
Mhm.
then you stop worrying about you. My favorite Audre Lorde quote is, when I dare to be powerful, to use my strengths in service of my vision, matters less and less whether I'm afraid. Like it stops mattering. Who cares? Because how I want to change the world is bigger. Do you
Yeah.
experience that in yourself and with your clients?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's part of where it's part of the coaching, right? I have to guide them, and I'm always inviting them to connect to a much bigger why, because like you said, it's power, but it's energy. Like that is the thing that's going to, at 6 a.m., where in the past when we didn't have that strong why, we didn't feel like getting up. But when you have a new why, like it's almost like you can't sleep, like you can't turn the brain off. And I've had that feedback, like, man, Roy, we talked around this, this much bigger why and why it's so important for me. And you led me to this, and you didn't lead me, but you guided me to it. You didn't influence my thought. And it's like, I can even stop thinking about it. Like they get excited and I get excited because of that.
Okay, so let's play along because we're both kind of processy people. So let's try to see if we could put a step-by-step flow on how to deal with fear. So step one with fear is it feels like you just need to shift your perspective on it and just kind of embrace it. It's like, so what was the thing that you said to your client was just go with it, or
Can you allow yourself to find comfort with fear?
okay, so step one is find comfort. Okay, step one, find comfort with fear. Step two is analyze the fear and what is underneath the fear. Like what is the fear underneath the fear, so
Yes.
so that's like step two, which relates to getting down to the storyline or the narrative that's unique to you.
Mm-hmm.
Step three is to possibly get support to help you unpack that narrative and maybe update it into something that's a little bit more empowering. And
Yes.
once you do that, then step four is get more connected to your bigger picture and your vision and your why. And you
Mm-hmm.
move from there. And then I don't know, is our
That's
process flow working? And
that is it.
what's
That's
our
it.
step five? Because we're process people. We have to have 5 steps to something. What's our fifth step?
Yes, 5 steps. The fifth step is just having the courage to take bold action.
All right.
You got to put it into practice. You got to take a step. You got to take that first step. Don't look down the road 10 steps. Just take that first big step, one step at a time.
So this fear busting dog will hunt. This process will work. We're good with this one. Should I write this up for us and we can both
Yes,
use it?
love that.
Okay. Because you could take the process improvement role out of the people, but you can never take the process
Not at
improvement
all. It's always
out
there.
of us. So we can leave our organizational consulting roles, but we still have our mindsets, which I think is another thing, which going back to, I'll just say one other thing. And I know we've been talking for a long time, but the whole idea of like my identity, you said that my identity was tied to being this kind of like process improvement, organizational consultant kind of person. And you were afraid of losing your identity, but what you found is your true identity, your skill sets as an engineering kind of person, that doesn't go away. The environment may be different, but you never really, you don't lose who you actually are. You only become more of who you actually are.
Absolutely. I use all of those, the engineering side, the process side every day. Like a huge component of my work is the inner work, but I consider the outer work. This is the strategy, the tactics, the process. I also include that as well because, you know, most of my clients, they are entrepreneurs. So they have an aspect, they run into these, you know, the fear, the beliefs in their own like inner beliefs, and it blocks them. But a lot of them are also, they haven't had the exposure or the tools to actually like, how do I process this out step by step, especially when it comes to like the technical pieces. So I always offer that in support of, you know, the goals that they're trying to achieve.
I would challenge you to think about your engineering side as just the external. My guess is that the kind of person who's attracted to you is attracted to your structured approach to the belief systems and the internal mind. You know, that everything from a spiritual growth standpoint doesn't have to be woo woo, a bunch of unicorns and, you know, crystals and all of that, that
Yeah.
it's, you know, you provide maybe spiritual technology, you know,
Yeah.
for the logical thinker, and
Yeah.
that you're a belief engineer, you know, and so it's like you're going to use that, which is a comfort to a structured person who doesn't want to, like, your intuition is grounded in your logic, and that feels a lot more comfortable. So my guess is that your ideal client is a high achieving person who's more logical and values your logical approach to transforming beliefs, to activating change, and to having that holistic view. Even the belief, all the belief things are the wheels of the wellness
Mhm.
aspects. They're
Mhm.
all part of that engineering. That engineer guy is looking at the internal life world through that same lens. I bet you the person who you help is really attracted to that.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, I received that because that is spot on. Thank
I,
you.
I like this. I like this new brand that I just created for you. So hopefully this works.
Yes,
You're a mindset engineer.
engineer.
You're a
Love it.
belief engineer, belief and spirit engineer. I like it.
Yes.
So, well, thank you for unpacking fear with me and staying on for this extra bonus session. And anything else you want to add about fear and beliefs? And we just didn't get around to it in our conversation.
You know, I think we've we've covered a lot. If anyone needs help, like reach out. Like I'm here to serve, and I love doing this type of work. So,
And are you going to have a blog on are you going to write a blog about our 5-step process for busting fear?
I will. I will definitely do that because that is amazing. I love that.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for chatting with me.
Thanks, Betsy.